Following on from my colleague Stuart Nash, the Labour Party will support this to Select Committee. In principle, sir, it's something that we in the Labour Party support. The access for New Zealanders into a tertiary education is something that we hold as an extraordinarily important principle here in New Zealand, and anything that might detract from that and make access less easy, obviously would be something we oppose. And I just want to point out in that regard that Mr. Key himself was looking at doing away with the interest-free element of student loans, certainly before he became Prime Minister, and even saying that he would oppose that with every bone in his body, and also suggesting that there might be some changes as recently as last year to Victoria University. That the interest-free provision might in fact be in some jeopardy. We do completely support the idea that loans need to be repaid. They need to be repaid on time. Again, we see that as being fair. The issue of the contact details that Stuart Nash referred to is something we look forward to discussing in the Select Committee. I think if there is one particular area, though, that we do have some reservations is about cutting the repayment holiday from 3 years to 1 year. I think there is we understand why that's going to happen. It does make it look like the government, the National Party, is being tough on those borrowers, but at the same time it may actually have the opposite effect than what we expect it to be. And I just want to quote from the Minister of Education, which says, quote, "This can be expected to have a negative impact at the margin on the borrower's decisions regarding whether to return to New Zealand, and that it will result in an ongoing increase in student loan debt held by the government of about $12 million a year." So, Mr. Speaker, while we support the intent, the actual part of the legislation, I think it's Clause 17 that deals with this, sir, we may need to take a better look at in the Select Committee. And with those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to this being brought up as a Select Committee and a better discussion there being had. Thank you.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. It's great to be addressing student loans again in this Parliament so soon after the last student loan bill, especially considering the crisis we're facing in this country. You know, we've got more than 600,000 Kiwis with a debt millstone around their neck of more than $12 billion. But of course, this bill isn't dealing with the crisis of student loans in our country. Of course, it's just tinkering around the edges. I think it's important to be discussing, given yesterday was the National Day of Student Action, where hundreds, if not thousands, of students protested this government's disastrous tertiary education policies around universities, and also given the voluntary student membership bill is about to pass with National Party and United Future Party support, I understand, and along with the regulations delivered yesterday on the Education Bill number 4, we're seeing Stephen Joyce deciding what's best for students, not for students. But I first want to make a comment on Amy Adams' use of the word generous. Now, I think this is a good example of this Crosby-Textor mantra the National and United Future parties keep reiterating, which is that we're being overly generous to students. Now, the fact is our student loan structure and student fee structure means that the government money is going via students, via the student loan, directly to institutions. The fact is we spend $3,000 less than the OECD average on our students. It's unfair and actually a bit of political spin to keep calling it particularly generous. So the Green Party will be opposing this bill. We're not like the Labour Party supporting it in Select Committee. We will be opposing it now, but we go into the Select Committee with an open mind. This bill does essentially three main things. It tries to maximise repayments from New Zealand-based borrowers by excluding losses from the calculation of student loan repayments. It allows inland revenue to ask for contact detailed person. And lastly, it shortens the repayment holiday from 3 years to 1 year and now requires borrowers to apply for a repayment holiday, not the automatic system as we had when the current minister implemented the legislation in 2007. So the Greens will be voting to oppose this bill because what we support is real action to tackle the student debt issue. We prefer an incentive approach to reducing the student debt burden. And obviously, while there are parts of the bill we support, on balance, the Green Party cannot be supporting the bill. To quickly go through the three main parts of the bill, the first is the excluding losses from calculations for the repayment for student loan purposes. So what this does is close a loophole. I think the reason why people are exploiting it is that the 10% compulsory student loan repayment once you reach the threshold is quite significant. 10% of my salary automatically deducts every week, as do many New Zealand graduates and student loan holders. Essentially, it's like a 10% tax increase on graduates in New Zealand. Can't forget, of course, that there are legitimate loss-making reasons for companies. Some businesses, especially startups run by keen graduates who are starting up a business, do want to make a loss in the short term so they can build the business up over the medium to long term. And what this change is going to mean is essentially the IRD is going to get more money, but it's the person who's going to get less money, and of course the business who's going to be getting less money. The irony, of course, is that we may see more Kiwi entrepreneurs heading overseas, but I do look forward to hearing a robust debate about it in the Select Committee stage. The second is the contact person. Now, this is the most uncontroversial part of the bill. We think it's a good common sense idea. It's pretty amazing. No one's thought about it before. Over the long years, the student loan scheme has been in existence. But we note there's going to be no penalties in the legislation, so it'll be interesting to find how the IRD expects the IRD to deal with the fact that many people might just say, well, I'm not going to tell you, IRD, what are you going to do about it? It's also good to know that they won't be chased up, either for the borrower's current tax status, that won't be passed on, or also the contact person's tax status won't be chased up by the IRD as part of this process. Now, the third and the most controversial element is the repayment holiday. Currently, overseas borrowers automatically receive a 3-year repayment holiday. There's around 38,000 Kiwis overseas with a student loan, and they've got a student loan balance of around $930 million. Now, a little bit of history. Of course, it was the Minister of Revenue, Peter Dunn, the perpetual Minister of Revenue under no matter what colour government, who introduced the student loan bill in 2007, which brought in this. Of course, we can't forget those overseas borrowers are still paying an interest rate of around 6.6%. I went through the Hansard, Mr Speaker, and I found Peter Dunn's speech on the first reading of said bill, and Mr Dunn said, "The new rules will make it easier for people overseas to repay their student loans and will offer the chance for a fresh start for those who have fallen into arrears. There will be a repayment holiday of up to 3 years for borrowers going overseas. During that time, they will not have to make repayments, though their loans will still attract interest. This change recognises the fact that it's not always easy for people to repay their loans while doing their OE or working overseas." In the first reading debate, Mr Speaker, Nandor Tanchos, representing the Green Party, said the Green Party was pleased with this, and we think the 3-year repayment holiday is good. Many of these people overseas are doing casual work, he said, and they're not necessarily in a position to make repayments. The Green Party then thought 3 years made a lot of sense. In the committee stage of the debate, Mr Dunn said, "The reality we face and what drove this legislation was the recognition that significant numbers of young New Zealanders were living overseas for a variety of reasons." Now, of course, many Kiwis move overseas. Some feel pushed, some feel pulled from overseas. But the fact is the problem of Kiwis going overseas hasn't gotten any better under a national government. In fact, it's got worse. Now, the problem we were trying to identify by bringing in this 3-year repayment holiday in 2007 hasn't got better in 2011. In fact, it's got worse. So in 2008, when National was campaigning during the election around it, there were 2,700 Kiwis moving across the Tasman, and now we're seeing the highest figures since 1981, and for the year to end in July, we've seen 31,600 Kiwis migrating to Australia. Now, the arguments Mr Dunn was using to bring in a 3-year holiday are in fact stronger in 2011 when he's reducing it. So when Mr Dunn in the committee stage says we need to take a pragmatic way through this, and being someone who places a great virtue on pragmatism, it struck me as the logical course of action was to derive the solution that we have to extend the holiday period for 3 years, recognising the fact that young New Zealanders take that extended period overseas. Now, I'm not sure what it is. Is it less logical now? Is it less pragmatic, Mr. Dunn? What has exactly changed? The fact is 3 years is an appropriate and a fair length of time for Kiwi OEs. The traditional Kiwi OE is in fact greater than a year, which is what this bill is changing. And when you look at probably the only data which has studied Kiwis overseas is the Kia survey, we see the largest block of time of Kiwi spending overseas is in fact in the 3 to 5 year category, followed by the 6 to 10 year category. A minority of them are in fact overseas for 1 year. One particular part which I think is quite controversial, I hope won't be, and hopes it's just a simple drafting or official explanation error, is the requirement for the 6 months application period. Now, when you read the official's briefing, that says, to be considered, an application must be received by the borrower before the borrower becomes overseas based, typically 6 months after the date of departure. I'm not quite clear what it is. Is it before the borrower becomes overseas based, or is it after the date of departure? It's absolutely not clear, and I hope in fact it isn't. The borrower has to apply 6 months in advance of departing the country to get this overseas repayment holiday, because that would seem particularly stringent and particularly silly, Mr. Speaker. What we're seeing in this bill is a grab bag of things. We agree with some, we disagree with others. We're going to take a keen eye in Select Committee to see how this goes. But I guess the key thing again is that we're ignoring the real issues to do with tertiary education and the decline. We've seen last week 5 of our 6 universities decline down the world rankings. We're seeing a lack of funding. We're seeing no will from the government to tackle the student debt problem. And the fact is, Peter Dunn has been a minister in various governments, but the fact is he still has not been able to implement his key policy, which the Green Party does agree, which is a bonding scheme, more carrots to help Kiwis reduce the student loan burden. And that's, Mr. Speaker, where the priority of this House must be.
Call to Euro, Flavel.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Kia ora tātou katoa. Sir, if I can cut